Today I am tackling something which has been on the agenda since the very beginning, my big hillside at the back of my layout. Now, I will admit I have been putting this off, and that's one of the reasons why this video has been slightly delayed. That and the fact that this room gets so hot. The weather has been 32, 33 degrees and it's literally been unbearable. So now that things have cooled down a little bit, I'm able to get back in here with the cameras and the lights and record everything for you guys to see. So enough waffle, let me get down on the board and explain what it is I want to achieve next. Those of you who have been following along for the last 10, 11 episodes will know exactly where we've got to in terms of this layout. I've got my engine shed area and this concrete hard standing, which I completed last time using DAS clay. I do still need to weather that, and that'll be something I get to at a later stage, hopefully once this entire landscape has been completed. Speaking of the landscape, this is exactly where I need it to be. I'm going to have some sort of hillside here. I always envisaged a rock face coming along the front and kind of keying off on the side with a grassy hill, maybe a few trees on the top. However, I realised there is a flaw in that plan, and I may have mentioned this in a previous episode. Now I've got my control box on the board, I always wanted to hide it behind the hillside, but if I go too high, particularly if I put any bushes and trees in the way, I'm not going to be able to see what's going on. So I need to be a little bit careful about where I place my scenic elements. But back to the layout, I'm thinking a tunnel mouth here, a hillside coming across the top, grass, bushes, and as I say, a rock face which I will weather in along with the stone tunnel mouth and this concrete hard standing here. So that's the plan for this video. I need to get the equipment out that I'm going to use, tools and all my materials, and then I'll be ready to get going. First things first, this is the tunnel mouth I'm going to be using on the layout. Admittedly, it is HO, but I think that will be fine. I have tested it on the layout and the locos will sit in fine. Let me just get this out of the box. It is plaster of Paris or some sort of equivalent. There we go, I'll bring that up to the camera so you guys can get a good look. And this I envisage going approximately there on the layout, and I will have to build some sort of rear to this, so obviously this is darkened out. It is a stopping point in the scenery. I'm not going to have any sort of fiddle yards or anything running off the ends. I think if I had time and I had the space, that would be ideal, but as my first ever layout, this is meant to be just kind of self-contained, so that's fine for now. I can come back and construct this area behind. With that, I next have to talk about the rocks. So these I have moulded over the last 24 to 48 hours with plaster of Paris, and I will probably do a quick separate video on that because I want to try and weather these independently, and I'm interested to see how that process works. So hit subscribe if you're interested in seeing how I personally make these and weather them up. But for now, what I'll do is I'll get these on the layout, roughly how I expect them to go, and then we'll discuss the next steps. So this is the rough plan. I've got some of the rock face here. Now, understandably, these are quite flat. They are almost just like bricks. And to work this out on a curve, I'm gonna have to be a little bit creative. As it stands, I've kind of got these overlapped, and it will kind of create this kind of unnatural carving effect. But is it? I mean, if you're working with rock faces and you're quarrying, you probably would come across at quite straight angles. I have seen that happen. But I think with a little bit of weathering, some grass, some moss, and various other things to kind of hide the gaps and smooth things out, I think it will look okay. Now, for now, everything's kind of leaning back a little bit towards me just to make sure it doesn't fall over. But I'm thinking that they will be a bit more vertical rather than at a lean. But I'm going to stick another one in here. And if you can imagine this coming all the way around, and I probably will return it down to maybe even to the end. I haven't yet fully decided how far I'm going to go. But on this end, I do feel like I need a second layer. So that kind of height is actually where I'm thinking it will be on the left-hand side. Now, these are quite brittle, being plaster of Paris, they're quite easy to snap. And as you can see, I've lost a corner on this one. So I may even take these down to half height and go 1.5 height from this side, and then slowly bring it down until it comes all the way down this side. So creating a nice even hillside as part of my scenic break at the back. So that's the plan for the general scenery in terms of rocks and the tunnel mouth, but how am I actually going to build this area? Now, There are many ways to do this, and I have been doing my research, and that's what's been taking part of the time. What I think I'm going to do is build a general framework out of chicken wire, then add a thin layer of papier-mâché just to bind that together. I don't think that will be strong enough, so then on top a layer of Mod Rock, although I could possibly even omit the papier-mâché, and that then should give me the basis I need for my hillside. One thing I do need to consider is how I make sure I can still access this panel from underneath, and with that I may add a few foam struts just on the rear in order to stop the back collapsing in. One question I have for you guys who have a bit more experience with this is, at what point should I be adding my back scene? I'm thinking I need to do the hillside first, because then I know what kind of heights I'm working with and what back scene I need to order. But please let me know in the comments, because it's been one of the questions I haven't quite answered just yet. Right, that's the plan. As usual, let's see how things go as I put my plan into action. I've got my wire cutters, I've got my chicken wire. Right, let's get going. Okay, so I've got this roll of chicken wire, quite wide, open and easy to manipulate. And this is what I'm going to be using to build, in effect, the underframe. So let me get this unraveled carefully. If you have gloves, I suggest using them because you do poke your hands quite a lot. And once I've got that unraveled and snipped roughly to length, then I should then be able to start manipulating it onto the board. Okay, that's about right in terms of length. I've given myself an inch or two each side, so I'm just going to carefully snip that there, and then I can start to tack it down and make my adjustments. Job done. Right, I'm just going to fold over these spiky ends because I am repeatedly catching myself. Okay, so this is what it feels like to be a chicken in a coop, or a rabbit. So I've got to get this somehow tacked down onto the board. If I had a stapler, that would be the best way forward, but I don't. So instead, I'm going to use some cable clips because they have a small pin, and I can then cable clip the edge of the chicken wire to the board and then hopefully bend it back over itself to then come up and build the back of the structure. I am going to need some supports, in which case I will be digging out my box of foam packing from various purchases, and then we'll see how we can construct this thing going forward. That's the initial part done. I'm going to put a couple more tacks just in this area, but I think the next thing I need to do is bring in the rock faces again and the tunnel portal and just offer everything up to make sure that roughly this shape is where I want it to be. As I always say, measure twice, cut once. With the various rock faces now in position and the tunnel mouth, I'm getting a good idea of how this is coming together. It's quite precarious. And I think I'm going to have to get my snips out and start cutting some wire because there's just too much of it. But that's fine. Let me just get myself up, and everything's just ever so slightly leant forward. But I think it's coming into place. So this is all going to be much further back, but I don't want to push it back too much because everything will fall over and likely crack. So I think what I'm going to need to do is snip up here and then overlap so that I can actually bend this back and start to create the top of the hillside. And then I'll go get some sort of foam to pack from underneath. But this is giving me a good idea of how my lines are working. Right, snippy snip time. So in order to join these two sections together, I'm just bending the ends so I don't catch my skin, but also it's acting as an anchor. So that's now tied together. I need to tie this edge, and the back edge obviously is going to be floating as a space so I can get into the control panel. But that looks okay, and I can manipulate the wire as I need to once I've got the rough structure in place. So I'm using these expanding foam pieces from various recent orders that I've had, and they're working really well. I just need to kind of wedge them roughly in position. I think I'll get one at the front, although I don't actually think I've got space there, so maybe I won't. I'll leave that flexible. I want to get possibly one in here. I might adjust this slightly. I know I cut the back as an angle, but I think that might be better in there. I also haven't really considered how I'm going to deal with the inside of the box. That's another problem, but if I go like that, yeah, and then I'll bring the back down. I think I might have to tie this down somehow. Starting to look pretty good. Just take your time. Take your time, manipulate things how you want them to be. Just need to take a little bit out the back here because obviously I need access to the control panel. I'm just being careful about how much I take off. Better to take off not enough than too much at this stage. I think I'll come along there, because I can always fold the wire back on itself if I do have too much. And also if I do this correctly, then I'll have some pieces which I can fold and join on this back here. Right, I've got one there, and there we go. So that spare piece can go away, and then I can do the same folding method without grabbing my skin, those pieces of wire, and bend that over. Well, there we go. I think I'm done. Excuse me while I go freehand with the camera, but I just want to give you a kind of pan around just so you can see the kind of structure that we've now got in place. Nice hillside running along the top with a fairly flat front where the rock face is going to be, arching down on this side, which is obviously where the engine's shed and refueling area is. So that will just taper off nicely. I think we'll just leave that as grass, a few bushes. And then as I come around the other side, you can see how it tapers off towards the corner where the tunnel mouth is going to be. One interesting feature, as you can see here, is that the actual cliff face is actually leaning outwards. That's not a big issue. I actually quite like that. It's quite realistic. You would carve and sometimes get the overhangs, so that looks quite nice. But is it going to be a hindrance when I come to putting the rock face on? Because those are essentially just tiles. They're just slabs. We'll see how we get on. And if I need to adjust it, I can do. But obviously once the mod rock is on, things are going to be much stronger and tougher. So I do need to kind of do a few tests now before I make a final decision. And last but not least, obviously there is a nice area here so I can access all of the control panel. Time to dive under the layout and grab some mod rock. Right, I've had a bit of a tidy up and we're set to do the mod rock. Now, if you don't know what mod rock is, basically it's a fabric material pre-soaked in plaster of Paris. It's exactly the same stuff they use in the medical profession. If you've ever broken an arm or a leg, sometimes they use fiberglass, but other times they use this stuff. So I'm basically going to cut it into strips to keep things easy to manage. I'm going to wet it and I'm going to lay it on. I've already disconnected all the electrics to the layout and I've covered my control box with a tea towel for a bit of extra protection. Having never done this before, I'm excited because it really does feel like now I'm entering the realms of proper modelling. I think after this I can officially call myself a modeller. A novice modeller, but a modeller nonetheless. So I'm going to soak this. I honestly don't know how long you need to soak it for. I presume, okay, yeah, till it's malleable, which is that. We don't want to wash off all of the plaster. It is quite wet. Yeah, that's wetter than I was expecting. So let's just start over here. Done. Okay, so what I need to do now is just continue and slowly cover everything with this mod rock. I'm hoping we don't see the wire mesh. I don't think we can, but I think we've got a very good, natural, undulating landscape. Oh, I'm loving this. This is fantastic. Right, let's get some music. Let's get going. Okay, I'm crouching down just so that I'm in shot because I have a bit of a challenge. The next bit I need to do obviously is the front, and my concern is as I come over, the Mod-Rock isn't sticking particularly well to the wire and it's just going to hang loose. I'm sure I will find a way, a bit of trial and error I think, so I'm going to start this side. I'm hoping that where it's flat and it's sticking, the rest will kind of follow, but I'll only know once I get going. Yeah, it is a little bit tentative. It is hanging. Not really sure what I can do here. It's just not quite sticking. Even with a bit of capillary action, perhaps if I just hold it long enough. Yeah, it's a bit tedious this. Will that stay? Let's get another piece on. Otherwise, I'm not really sure what my options are. I could lean something against it, I suppose, but obviously I don't want it to go off. So I won't be using the rock face as a means of holding it in place. I'm just overlapping the bottom. I don't mind that so much. Yes, it's not quite, it's just hanging. I know it will go hard, but I really wanted it kind of in contact, at least with the mesh. What do I do? Unfortunately, I can't post this and then wait for your responses and your advice. Not sure what to do. I think the best thing I can do is just continue. And hopefully someone in the comments will let me know. Perhaps I just need to go along. That might work. Let's give that a go. Right, let's see. Okay. That's what my concern was, which is why I went vertically in the first place. It's just going to roll off. So let's do it the other way. Let's start at the top. There's a bit of a curtain. And then that will give us something to adhere to. Okay, I'm bringing you back in because I've discovered that if you use smaller pieces of Mod-Rock, what happens is there's less weight pulling on the fabric and therefore it's more likely to stick to the wire. It's worked over here, so I'm hoping it starts to work. This is really the major piece here, the overhang. So I can get a little bit, let's go there, and just get it so it's touching the existing material. And it is very tentative, very delicate. I'm just peeling my fingers away. I'm almost just using this small piece of plastic here, which was the inside of the Mod-Rock roll, just to get it to touch the wire. Because if you use your fingers, capillary action, the water makes it stick to your hand. So this seems to be working. Don't over fiddle, don't over fiddle. It will take me longer, but I think that is the way forward. I'll stick another piece over here, sort of leaning over the top here. That's gone on perfectly straight away. Happy with that. Don't even mind if there's divots because all this is going to be hidden behind. It's really the overhang I want to get right. And this stuff dries really quickly. Right, that is everything. I'm just checking little bits around the back here. Obviously I've got a lot of cut wire and I don't want to be catching myself, but I can tidy that up later. And also there will be at some point a back seam covering the majority of this wire. I'm really impressed with this. Modrock is a great modelling material, not something that I've ever used before, and I've had great fun doing it. It's been a bit fiddly in places, and my advice would be cut small pieces, take your time, make sure it's wet, but not too wet. And a little tip I did learn, I was putting 3 or 4 pieces in the water to make sure it was ready when I came around to using it, but it will actually still set even if you leave it in the water. So just a little tip there, it sets fairly quickly. This is pretty much gone off at the top. I don't want to touch the stuff at the front because obviously I've just finished that. I will let this whole thing dry completely, and then it's a case of getting the rocks on. I've got a little bit to add on a corner here, down the bottom and around the back, as I said. But in terms of the tunnel mouth and the rocks, I need to consider how I'm going to actually glue that in place. And I think really I've got 2 options. The first being a hot glue gun, which seems the simplest way of doing it. And secondly is to use plaster of Paris or even potentially filler. Now I have a big 5 kilogram bag of plaster of Paris, so I could just knock up a stiff mix of that and use that as the adhesive. Something tells me that if I use a hot glue gun, I'm going to limit the actual time I've got to get things in position, and also if there's a problem, prizing it off is likely to cause issues. Whereas with the plaster of Paris method, I think I'm going to have just a little bit longer because I can make it wet and sloppy, which will allow me to manipulate things as I need to. But it may require me holding it in place just as the moisture is sucked out to hold it in place. I also need to make a couple more of these because I don't feel like I've got enough to actually finish the rock face. So I'll go and do that off camera, and then once everything is set, I can start to stick them in position. Okay, so it's been a little while and now everything is absolutely dry and it's time for me to get the various rocks onto the front. Before I do that though, let me apologise. I realised the last section, the audio was a bit intermittent. My main mic was running out of battery and I hadn't realised, so it was knocking back to the ambient mic. Should be okay now though, so let's carry on. As I mentioned earlier, there are different ways in which I can attach these rocks to the front. They are made out of plaster of Paris and they're quite porous, so I could use more plaster of Paris, just a thicker mix, dollop it on the back here and then simply place it on the front. That will work. I could also use some form of glue if I wanted to stick that on, but what I do have to hand is a gun of instant grab adhesive, which I've been using around the house on various DIY work. I'm never going to use it all up, so I'm going to use it here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this sort of adhesive, often called Stix-Like because it sticks like the proverbial to a blanket. So I'm absolutely expecting a decent bond between the rock faces and the new Modrock mountainside. Where I've placed the rock faces currently is pretty much where I want things to be, and on the top here I have actually snapped one in half along the length because that should then give me a little bit more detail along this top part, and then I can feed it down as we get around the corner. One thing to note I realise is that the actual tunnel mouth is going to be sitting behind the rock face. Now obviously that wouldn't happen in real life. You'd actually build the tunnel mouth over the top of the rock face. But I can't do anything about that right now because I want that to be exactly there so it's equidistant over the rails. So adhesive at the ready, rocks at the ready, let's get sticking. So that's the first 4 pieces along the bottom, and that's gone okay. I think if I had have made sure that I pushed the actual Modrock flat when it was drying, it would have made this process a bit easier because things are sticking out and a bit more wobbly than I remember them being when I was first testing. Equally, because I'm putting adhesive on, things are slightly off the actual mountainside. So everything's a bit higgledy-piggledy. It's not as super smooth as I was expecting. That said, I think I can get in with some filler or plaster from Paris and fill in all the gaps, and I'll also use a tool to score in some extra rock lines. I think by the time I've done that, you won't notice anything at all. The final adhesive step is to get some more rocks along the top in this gap here. And that concludes the rock build. I'm very happy. I'm very happy indeed. As with everything on this layout, everything you're watching on this channel, this is the first time I've ever done this, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I think it's just a case really of understanding a kind of mosaic system, making sure the striata of the rocks, if that's the right word, is horizontal and consistent. Otherwise, just have fun. I've just used my imagination. I wasn't intending on putting rocks kind of under the overhang, but I thought there probably would be, wouldn't there? So if it was just earth, it would eventually just erode and fall down and the whole thing would disappear. So I thought I will put some in there, and all I did was just break up the larger pieces and slowly put them in. So it's a bit like creating your own puzzle. But were there any lessons? Yes, there were. Even though I used the instant grab adhesive with the gun, I don't think I would recommend it. It's quick, it's easy, don't get me wrong, and it's very easy to gun it on the back of these various bits of rock and stick them on, but it doesn't really move very well. It's very thick, very viscous, so it literally grabs and stays there. It does what it says on the tube. Whereas actually, I think in hindsight, using some sort of mixed material, either filler or the plaster of Paris, which I actually made the rocks out of, might have been a better option. I could have whipped that up like double cream, really thick, but still loose enough that I could move things around. I think also it would act more as a filler on the back. So down the bottom, you probably saw during recording, there's quite a few large gaps just because of the way the actual mod rock and the shell ended up being quite bobbly. The various different pieces of rock kind of sit in front and behind each other. That's not a problem because I will be going back to fill that. But I just think if I had have used something a bit more wet and a bit more malleable, I almost could have overloaded the back and squished it into place and then just use my fingers to tidy things up and come back to it later. So I think there are pros and cons of using the instant grab adhesive approach, but I've learnt my lessons and I think next time I would use a different approach. Last but not least, on the top here, I had a few bits left over, so I thought I'll just add a few rocks to the top of the hillside. I think you would expect to see a little outcrop of rocks every now and then, particularly given this whole situation. They might not be the right kind of rocks for the scene, perhaps they should have been boulders, but that's what I've got and I hate waste. So I've stuck them on, I'll weather them in, and I'm sure when all the scenery is on, all the grass and all the trees, you won't be able to tell the difference. I hope. Right, next steps then, I'm going to let this dry and then I'm going to come back for the final phase, which I've just mentioned, which is with a little bit of plaster of Paris, I'm going to fill in the gaps and just make everything neat and tidy. I'll see you in a minute. I am ready. I have my plaster of Paris mixed up into the consistency of a thick double cream, and I also have a wooden scribe with a nice pointy end and a flat end for modelling some rocks. This is the same wooden scribing tool I used originally on the hard standing layout. I don't know how easy this is going to be to see given that it's white on white, but this is quite thick. And also I am quite aware that plaster of Paris goes off. So I'm not going to keep talking. I'm going to get down and get it on between my rocks. Right, it's starting to go off already just in the time that I've repositioned my cameras. So I'm going to use the other end of my spoon because it gives me just a little bit more control. I just want to go a small amount at a time. And I honestly don't know if this is the right way to do it. I'm just going to slowly parge in the plaster of Paris and get things mostly in and filling the cracks. And I can come back when things start to set, which I feel will be very quick, and then start to add some rock face detail with the scribing tool. I don't need to be perfect, but at the same time I don't want to ruin the actual rock face as it is, because I actually really like the rock face. So I'm going to move quickly but cautiously. This probably isn't the best tool for the job, but I don't actually have anything else which is the right kind of size apart from possibly my finger. See, that's starting to go off already. It's already drying. I think going on top of the existing plaster Paris rock face is just sucking out the moisture. And again, in hindsight, I think what I would advise is using plaster of Paris or something very similar as the actual adhesive medium, focusing on one rock face at a time, but overload the back so that you get excess squeezing out between. And then basically just tidying up as you go. So almost like an actual bricklayer. Tidying up the perps as you go. Because this is not affording me much time. Now, of course, as I said before, I will be covering a fair amount of this with weathering and vegetation. So it doesn't need to be perfect. But I'm just wondering if at some point there's a judgment call to be made as to whether or not it's worth doing this at all, or whether I should just leave it rather than making it worse. It's really going off in the ramekin now. Yeah, it's really going off, as you can see. I think I've got probably about 2 minutes. Big hole there. Really big hole there. Right, I am having to work so quickly here. This stuff is drying so quickly. I've got literally minutes, so I don't really have time to mess around with cameras, recording, pausing, and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just gonna do the next bit with my scribe off camera and see if I can get the result I want before moving on. Stand by, I'll be back. What I've learned to do is use a small amount, and I really do mean small amount, and I don't know if you can see that, but just adding a bit of water to the end and almost making a bit of a slop that I can then drop over the top and use it to rub in, and that just helps me smooth things out a bit. And that seems to work okay. I may have to do 2 layers on this top piece here because there's quite a lot there and I need it to go off. See, I'm dragging it around, so I really need wet fingers. And I didn't even think about it, but I really should have covered my track. But all that will get weathered in. Ballast, hopefully, next episode. We shall see. It'll either be ballast or I will be weathering in this cliff face. Sorry, I realise my commentary is a bit stilted, but that's because I'm concentrating. Okay. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this particular video. It's been a long one in the making, I have to say. There's lots of drying, lots of fiddling around, and obviously making sure I capture everything when I'm really under some time pressures is quite difficult. So I hope it was worth it in the end. I haven't completely finished filling in all the gaps. I will continue to do that off camera. I don't want to show you absolutely everything. Save a little for next time. Speaking of which, next time I've got one of two options. Either I get my paints out and I put a base colour on this and start to weather my rock face, or I can get out a tub of fine ballast, which I've had in the stores for about 9 years, and actually ballast my track. I'm not sure which one I want to do first, given that I've been waiting to ballast track for a very long time. That may be the one I go for. I do want to do a little bit of testing with regards to weathering and painting rocks, so I think I will do a separate video on that just to make sure that I've got the technique down before I tackle the entire layout. Beyond that, it's a case of static grass, bushes and trees, and then beyond that, it's a case of getting the buildings back on the board and then adding the final bits of finesse with regards to all of the little scenic elements. I hope you're enjoying this series. It's been a fantastic journey for me, as I say, doing this completely from scratch. Everything you're seeing, I have never done before. I've done a lot of research, watched lots of videos, read lots of forum posts and books, and I am really enjoying the process. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this content, hit subscribe. I'm in it for the subs. Like it, leave a comment. I love hearing from you in terms of your advice and your comments, what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, what you'd suggest I do otherwise. So till next time, take care everyone. I'll see you real soon. Bye bye.